Hello, everyone. It's great to see you again in today's story, the ancient story. Anunnaki, the mystery of the race that created humans. Now, please listen to this story. Hey guys, tonight we journey back to the very dawn of what we call history, to a place of sun-scorched earth and life-giving water, to uncover a story so monumental, it asks us to question the very definition of what it means to be human. You're standing on a vast, flat plain under a blistering sun. The air is thick, hazy with dust. It smells of dry clay, wet reeds, and the distant promise of water. Two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, carve shimmering, unpredictable paths through the landscape, leaving behind a wake of impossibly fertile black silt. This is Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. And let's be honest, if you were actually here in 5000 BC, you probably wouldn't survive this. Between the scorpions, the sketchy water, and the complete lack of Wi-Fi, you'd be toast in about a day. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And in the comments, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always cool to see how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The heat is the first thing you notice. It's a physical weight pressing down on you, making the simple act of breathing feel like an effort. You look around, and in the distance you see the impossible, a city. Not a village of mud huts, but a genuine city rising from the plain, dominated by a structure that seems to defy gravity, a massive stepped pyramid clawing its way toward the sky. This is a ziggurat, a man-made mountain of baked brick, and seeing it for the first time feels like looking at a glitch in reality. How could people who have just recently figured out farming on a mass scale build something so audacious? This land, later called Sumer, is a place of brutal contradictions. The rivers that give life are famously temperamental. One day they are your best friend, irrigating your barley fields and providing fish for your family. The next, they're throwing a tantrum, swelling into a furious, muddy torrent that can wash away your home, your crops, your entire world without a moment's notice. It's a life lived on a knife's edge, constant negotiation with forces far beyond your control. This constant dance with disaster, however, seems to have sparked something extraordinary in the people here. To control the water, they invented irrigation on a scale never before seen, digging a complex web of canals that turn the unpredictable floodplains into the world's first breadbasket. You wander into the bustling city. Maybe it's Uruk, maybe it's Uar. The streets are narrow, unpaved, and teeming with life. You dodge a cart being pulled by a donkey, its wooden wheels groaning in protest. This simple invention, the wheel, first appeared right here around 3500 BC. A fact of mainstream history that utterly transformed transportation, pottery, and warfare forever. Children covered in dust chase each other through alleys, their laughter mixing with the bleating of goats and the constant chatter of merchants haggling over sacks of grain and jugs of beer. And oh, the beer. It's not the crisp, filtered lager you might be used to. This Sumerian beer is thick, nutritious, and cloudy, more like a fermented bread smoothie. It's a dietary staple, a source of calories and hydration, and even a form of payment for laborers. It's so important that they have a goddess of brewing, Ninkasi, to oversee its creation. You can almost smell the sweet, malty aroma wafting from a nearby tavern. But as you soak in the sights and sounds of this revolutionary new way of living, you can't shake the feeling that something deeper is at play. Why build cities here, in this harsh, unforgiving environment? Historians still argue whether the initial drive towards urbanization was due to environmental pressures, religious devotion, or simple administrative necessity. Was it a defense against the floods and marauding tribes? Or was it a desire to live closer to their gods, whose temples, the ziggurats, formed the very heart of each city? The people here believe the world is governed by an assembly of powerful, often frightening deities who control the sun, the storms, the harvest, and the shadowy realm of the afterlife. Life is short, and the world is full of mysteries. You see priests in flowing robes, their faces intense with concentration, carrying offerings into the temple. You see farmers looking to the sky, praying for rain but not too much rain. There's a palpable sense that humanity is not the master of its own destiny, but rather a humble servant to a pantheon of cosmic landlords. And it's this profound relationship with the divine, this constant effort to understand their place in the universe, that would lead them to their single greatest invention. Something more impactful than the wheel, more vital than the plow. They needed a way to keep track of the grain, to record the laws, to praise the gods, and to tell their stories. They needed a way to make words permanent, to carve them into eternity. And in doing so, they would unknowingly leave behind a set of clues that would, thousands of years later, fuel one of the most wild and enduring conspiracy theories of all time. You step away from the noise of the main thoroughfare, drawn toward a quieter courtyard within the temple complex. Here, the air is still and smells of wet earth. You see rows of young boys sitting cross-legged on the ground, each one hunched over a small, damp slab of clay. They are scribes in training, the future accountants, lawyers, and historians of this burgeoning civilization. An older man, a master scribe, paces between them, his gaze sharp and critical. This is the Adubba, the tablet house, the world's first school. And it is not a gentle place. A quirky, if slightly grim, tidbit from history is that one of the most important figures in the Adubba was the man in charge of the whip, whose job was exactly what it sounds like. Good posture and perfect wedges were not optional. You pick up a discarded piece of clay. It's cool and heavy in your palm, surprisingly yielding. This humble mud is the foundation of recorded history. Nearby, you see a bundle of reeds, their ends cut to a sharp, triangular point. You take one. This is your stylus. Pressing the corner of the reed into the clay, you find it leaves a clean, wedge-shaped impression. Pressing harder makes a larger wedge. Angling it differently changes its direction. This, in its elegant simplicity, is cuneiform, the world's first system of writing. It didn't start out this abstract. In its earliest form, it was a series of simple pictures or pictograms. A drawing of a head meant head. A drawing of a stalk of barley meant barley, simple, direct, and useful for keeping track of goods. You can almost imagine the first accountant getting frustrated trying to draw 57 identical sheep and thinking, there has to be a better way. And there was. Over centuries, these pictures were stylized and streamlined for speed and efficiency. The curvy lines of the original pictograms were difficult to draw quickly in wet clay, so they were broken down into a combination of these simple wedge-shaped strokes. The head became a series of abstract wedges that no longer looked like a head at all. What's truly revolutionary, though, is the next leap. The marks began to represent not just things, but sounds. The symbol for head, which in Sumerian is lu, could now be used to represent the sound lu in a longer, more complex word. This is the moment writing learned to speak. Scholars still debate the exact speed at which cuneiform transitioned from a purely logographic system, where symbols represent whole words, to one incorporating syllabic sounds. This innovation allowed the Sumerians to write down anything they could say: laws, letters, lullabies, and most importantly for our story, their deepest, most sacred myths. The sheer volume of what they wrote is staggering. Archaeologists have unearthed hundreds of thousands of these clay tablets, and if you were to translate the majority of them, you might find yourself getting a little sleepy for a different reason. Most of them are, to be blunt, boring. They are the ancient equivalent of spreadsheets and receipts. 20 jars of beer for the temple workers. 5 goats delivered to the house of Uarnamu. It's a mainstream historical fact that cuneiform was primarily a tool for bureaucracy and administration. It was born from the need to manage a complex urban society. But tucked away amongst the endless lists of livestock and grain are other tablets. Tablets that tell a different kind of story. You can imagine a young scribe, after a long day of practicing his wedges and trying to avoid the man with the whip, staying late by the light of a flickering oil lamp. He's not writing about barley anymore. He's carefully pressing the ancient stories into the clay, the stories his grandfather told him, the sacred epics of creation, of heroes, and of the gods who rule over humanity. These are the texts that hold the key. They speak of a time before time, of a sky god named Anu, and an earth goddess named Ki. They describe a complex and sprawling family of deities, full of jealousy, wisdom, and terrifying power. And as you sift through these mythological accounts, one name begins to appear again and again, sometimes in one context, sometimes in another. Anunnaki. Finding one of these tablets is like finding a message in a bottle, a direct communication from a lost world 5,000 years in the past. The clay, once baked in the sun or fired in a kiln, becomes almost as permanent as stone. It doesn't rot like papyrus or decay like parchment. It survives fires and floods, patiently waiting in the ruins of buried cities to be found. And when they are found, they provide the source code, the raw data, for everything we know about the Sumerians. They are the reason we know about their beer-loving goddess and their terrifying school teachers. But they are also the entire basis for a theory that suggests these tablets tell a story that is not myth at all, but history. A history not of gods, but of visitors from somewhere else entirely. The mystery of the Anunnaki doesn't come from ancient aliens landing in a modern city. It comes directly from these wedge-shaped marks pressed into humble river clay. And understanding that is the first step to understanding the whole wild story. With the feel of cool clay still on your fingertips, you turn your attention from the scribes to the towering ziggurat that dominates the city. Its shadow stretches across the courtyards as the sun begins to dip lower in the sky. This structure is more than just an impressive building. It's a connection point, a physical link between your world and the world of the gods. The Sumerians believed their primary purpose on Earth was to serve these divine beings, to feed them, clothe them, and build them magnificent homes so they might look favorably upon humanity. Failure to do so could result in famine, flood, or pestilence. It was a service born of awe and terror. And what a demanding group of landlords they were. As you delve deeper into the stories etched on those tablets, you're not introduced to a single, all-powerful, benevolent god. Instead, you find a sprawling, dysfunctional, and intensely dramatic divine family. Welcome to the Sumerian pantheon, which feels less like a sacred assembly and more like a celestial reality TV show. At the head of it all is Anu, the god of the heavens. He's the patriarch, the chairman of the board, who resides in the highest celestial realm. He's powerful but often distant, preferring to let his children and grandchildren manage the messy day-to-day affairs of the cosmos. Then you have his two most important sons, Enlil and Enki, whose rivalry forms the central conflict in much of Sumerian mythology. Enlil is the god of wind, storm, and the earth. He's powerful, stern, and often curmudgeonly. He was given dominion over the earth and is largely in charge of its administration. He is a stickler for the rules, and frankly, he doesn't seem to like humans very much. He sees them as noisy, bothersome creatures who constantly disturb his peace. He's the divine equivalent of a neighbor who's always threatening to call the Cosmic Homeowners Association on you for mowing your lawn too early. His half-brother, Enki, is the complete opposite. Enki, sometimes called Ea by later civilizations, is the god of water, wisdom, magic, and creation. He's clever, inventive, and generally pro-humanity. While Enlil got the earth, Enki was given dominion over the Apsu, the primordial freshwater abyss that the Sumerians believed lay deep beneath the ground. He is the master craftsman, the chief scientist of the gods, the one who knows the secrets of form and function. He's often depicted as a trickster, but a benevolent one who frequently steps in to help humanity, usually behind Enlil's back. This fraternal conflict, Enlil the authoritarian versus Enki the humanist, is a recurring theme, and it will become absolutely critical to our story. This isn't just a boys' club either. The goddesses are just as powerful and complex. There's Inanna, later known as Ishtar, the goddess of love, beauty, sex, desire, and, just to keep things interesting, war. She is ambitious, passionate, and utterly formidable. One moment she is the embodiment of sensuality, the next, She is a terrifying warrior who makes the heavens tremble and the earth shake. The stories of her descent into the underworld to challenge her sister, the Queen of the Dead, are some of the most powerful myths ever written. A quirky tidbit is that Inanna's symbols were the lion and the eight-pointed star, and her priests would often cross-dress, blurring gender lines in rituals that celebrated her dual nature as both hyperfeminine and ferociously martial. And this is just the top tier. The full pantheon is vast, with hundreds of deities responsible for every aspect of existence, from the aforementioned goddess of beer, Ninkasi, to the god of brickmaking, Kula. A mainstream historical fact is that the Sumerian religion was polytheistic and anthropomorphic. Their gods possessed all the virtues and vices of humans: love, jealousy, anger, compassion, but on an epic, world-altering scale. They weren't distant, perfect beings. They were flawed, relatable, and terrifyingly powerful characters. They fought, they schemed, they held grudges, and they fell in love. Historians still argue whether the stories of the gods were purely allegorical, meant to explain natural phenomena, or if they were rooted in a form of euhemerism, where the myths were exaggerated retellings of the lives of real ancient kings and heroes. Did the myth of Enlil's storm simply explain the violent weather of the region, or did it recall a powerful ruler whose wrath was as feared as a hurricane? It is within this crowded, chaotic, and fascinating divine soap opera that we first find the term Anunnaki. In the earliest texts, the word seems to refer to the most powerful deities in the pantheon, the children of the sky god Anu. They are the princely offspring, the divine elite. The term is often used almost interchangeably with the gods in general. They are described as the High Council, the beings who decree the fates of both gods and mortals. But as you continue to read through the different myths from different periods, you notice the term's meaning starts to shift. It becomes more specific. In some of the most famous and compelling Akkadian and Babylonian myths, which were built upon these earlier Sumerian foundations, the Anunnaki take on a very particular and chilling role. They are no longer just the general council of gods. They become something else. They become the judges. The great, silent, fearsome judges of the underworld. Your journey takes you away from the sunlit world of ziggurats and bustling markets and into the conceptual darkness of the Sumerian afterlife. To understand the Anunnaki as they appear in the core Mesopotamian text, you have to understand what happened when your life in that dusty city came to an end. And it wasn't a pleasant prospect. The Sumerian underworld, known as Kur or Irkalla, is not a place of heavenly reward or fiery punishment based on your deeds in life. It is simply a destination. A bleak, shadowy, and deeply depressing one. Imagine a vast, dark cavern deep beneath the earth, a place where the dead exist as pale, silent spirits. The entrance to this realm is guarded by a fearsome gatekeeper named Neti. To enter, you must pass through 7 gates, and at each gate, you are forced to shed an item of clothing or a piece of jewelry. By the time you arrive before the queen of the underworld, the formidable Ereshkigal, you are naked and powerless. This stripping away of earthly identity is a powerful metaphor for the finality of death. There is no sunshine here, no laughter, no beer. The residents of Kur are described as being clothed like birds, with wings for garments, and their food is dust, and their drink is clay. It's a miserable, eternal existence of gray monotony. And it is here, in this gloomy realm, that the Anunnaki take on their most specific and powerful role in mainstream Mesopotamian mythology. In texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh and the myth of Inanna's descent, the Anunnaki are described as the 7 judges of the underworld. When the goddess Inanna, in all her vibrant, worldly glory, audaciously descends to the underworld, she is brought before Ereshkigal and the Anunnaki. The text says, the Anunnaki, the 7 judges, rendered their decision against her. They looked at her with the eyes of death, spoke to her with the speech of anger, shouted at her with a cry of heavy guilt. The sick woman was turned into a corpse. This is their core function in these later, influential myths. They are the ultimate arbiters of the dead. They don't weigh your sins in a balance like the Egyptian gods. Their judgment seems more absolute, a final confirmation of one's status as a resident of this grim kingdom. They are formidable, ancient, and deeply connected to the chthonic or subterranean forces of the universe. They are the divine bedrock, the powers of fate who sit in silent, solemn judgment. A mainstream historical fact is that this portrayal of the Anunnaki as underworld judges is a key element in Akkadian and Babylonian mythology, which inherited and adapted Sumerian beliefs. So let's take a quick inventory based on the clay tablets themselves. The Anunnaki are the princely offspring of the sky god Anu, B, a collective term for the highest council of the gods, and C, the seven great judges of the underworld. They are powerful, divine, and integral to the Sumerian and Akkadian religious worldview. They are gods, plain and simple. For over a century of modern archaeology and cuneiform studies, this was the accepted understanding. They were fascinating figures within a rich and complex mythological system. But what if this understanding was completely wrong? What if the tablets were not just myths? What if the word God was a mistranslation? Scholars still debate the precise etymology of the name Anunnaki, with the most common interpretation being those of princely seed or princely offspring, pointing to their lineage from the sky god Anu. However, other interpretations have been proposed, focusing on different possible roots of the Sumerian words. This is where the story takes a sharp 90-degree turn from the halls of academic consensus into a realm of staggering speculation. A quirky tidbit, perhaps, is that the very act of translation is an act of interpretation. The same set of wedges can be interpreted in subtly different ways by different scholars, and it's in those subtle differences that entirely new worlds can be born. Imagine all those cuneiform tablets, hundreds of thousands of them, sitting in museums and university archives. For decades, they are the domain of a handful of highly specialized scholars who can read the arcane script. They painstakingly piece together the myths, the histories, the receipts for goats. And then someone comes along from outside this small, cloistered world. Someone who looks at the same tablets, the same words, Anunnaki, Anu, Enlil, Enki, and sees not a story about gods, but a detailed historical account. A technical manual even. An account of beings who were not divine, but were flesh and blood. Beings who were very, very tall, lived for a very, very long time, and most importantly, did not come from here. Suddenly, the Anunnaki are not judges of a mythical underworld beneath the dirt. They are visitors from a very real world in the sky. And their story is not one of religious belief, but of extraterrestrial intervention. This is the moment the Anunnaki of mythology are reborn as the Anunnaki of ancient astronaut theory. And it all starts with one man that you're now standing in a library. Not an ancient one with clay tablets, but a modern one. The air smells of old paper and bookbinding glue. You pull a book from the shelf. The cover is striking, maybe a little sensational, featuring a blend of ancient carvings and futuristic planetary imagery. The title is something like The 12th Planet. The author's name is Zecharia Sitchin, and as you open the cover, you are taking a deliberate step away from the path of mainstream scholarship and into a parallel universe of interpretation. Zecharia Sitchin, born in Azerbaijan and raised in what was then Palestine, was a fascinating figure. He was not a trained archaeologist, historian, or cuneiform scholar in the academic sense. He was a journalist, an author, and self-taught expert in Hebrew and ancient Semitic languages. A mainstream historical fact is that Sitchin's work exists entirely outside of academic peer review. It is considered by virtually all mainstream historians and scientists to be pseudoscience. But to dismiss him outright is to miss the sheer, captivating power of the narrative he constructed, a narrative that has taken on a life of its own and profoundly shaped modern belief in ancient astronauts. Sitchin's journey began with a question, a nagging puzzle he felt was unanswered by conventional history. He looked at the Sumerians and, like many before him, was struck by the suddenness and sophistication of their civilization. They seemed to spring out of nowhere around 3800 BC with a fully formed system of writing, advanced astronomical knowledge, complex legal codes, and monumental architecture. Where did all this knowledge come from? The conventional answer is that it was a gradual evolution, the brilliant result of human ingenuity responding to environmental and social pressures. Sitchin found this explanation unsatisfying. For him, the Sumerians themselves provided the answer in their texts. All their knowledge was given to them by the gods. But Sitchin's key radical move was to propose a simple substitution. Every time you see the word God in the ancient text, he argued, you should replace it with extraterrestrial. The sky god Anu wasn't a deity, he was the ruler of another planet. Enlil and Enki weren't gods of storm and water. They were high-ranking officials in an interplanetary expedition. The Anunnaki weren't judges of the underworld. They were the rank-and-file astronauts, the common people of this alien race who had come to Earth. He claimed to have a unique ability to read and interpret Sumerian cuneiform, an assertion that is fiercely contested by actual cuneiform experts. Scholars still debate the very foundation of Sitchin's linguistic claims, as his translations often rely on assigning meanings to Sumerian words that are not supported by any known lexicon or comparative analysis with other Semitic languages. For example, he connected the Sumerian term for gods, Dayan.Jr, to a meaning of the righteous ones of the rockets, a translation that is linguistically impossible according to mainstream scholars, but sounds incredibly cool and forms a cornerstone of his thesis. A joke for you. This is like looking at the word butterfly and insisting it's a historical record of dairy products with wings. Armed with his unique translations, Sitchin began to reassemble the Sumerian myths into a single, cohesive, chronological story. It was no longer a collection of allegorical tales, but a detailed mission log. He took the epic of creation, the Enuma Elish, and said it wasn't about the mythological birth of the gods, but a factual account of planetary formation in our solar system. He scoured the stories of Enki and Enlil, Inanna, and the rest of the pantheon, and extracted what he believed was the historical data buried beneath millennia of mythological exaggeration. A quirky tidbit about Sitchin's methodology is that he treated every myth as part of this single, grand narrative. He would pull a line from a creation myth, a name from a king list, and a plot point from a heroic epic written centuries apart in different cities, and stitch them together as if they were all chapters in the same history book. This is something no historian would ever do, as it ignores context, evolution of belief, and cultural differences. But for Sitchin, it was all one story, because it had all really happened. He wasn't the first to propose that gods were aliens. The idea had been bubbling in fiction and fringe theories for decades, most famously popularized by Erich von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods in 1968. But Sitchin's approach was different. It felt more scholarly, more rigorous. He wasn't just pointing at mysterious statues and asking, could it be aliens? He was pointing at the texts. He was claiming to have the primary source documents, the aliens' own words, transcribed by their human servants. He presented his work not as speculation, but as translation. This gave his theory a weight and credibility in the public imagination that was unprecedented. He was the man who had cracked the code. And the first part of that code revealed the answer to where these alien astronauts, the Anunnaki, had come from. It wasn't Mars or Venus. It was a planet that our astronomers had never seen. A rogue world, lurking in the dark outer reaches of our solar system. You are now floating in the black, silent void of interstellar space. The sun is a distant, brilliant jewel. The familiar planets, Jupiter with its swirling storms, Saturn with its glorious rings, are laid out before you like marbles on black velvet. According to Zecharia Sitchin's narrative, you are witnessing the solar system as it was billions of years ago, a chaotic and unstable place. And somewhere, out in the deep black, a rogue planet is moving. A wanderer, captured by the sun's gravity, is beginning a long, elliptical journey inward. This is the home world of the Anunnaki. Sitchin, drawing on his unique interpretation of Babylonian cosmology, gives it a name, Nibiru. In Sitchin's retelling of the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, the mythological battle between the god Marduk and the primordial monster Tiamat is not a myth at all. It is, he claims, a precise and scientifically accurate account of a massive cosmic collision. Tiamat, he asserts, was not a dragon goddess, but an ancient planet that existed in the space between Mars and Jupiter. As the intruder planet Nibiru entered the inner solar system, one of its moons smashed into Tiamat, splitting her in two. One half of the shattered Tiamat was thrown into a new orbit, eventually becoming the Earth. The other half was pulverized, forming the asteroid belt. The Earth's moon? That was one of Nibiru's original satellites, pulled away and captured by Earth's new gravity. The planet Nibiru itself, having caused all this celestial chaos, settled into a vast 3,600-year elliptical orbit around our Sun. This cosmic billiard shot story became the foundation for everything that followed. It explained the existence of the asteroid belt and provided a neat, if violent, origin for Earth and its moon. Historians still argue whether the Enuma Elish is primarily a political document created to justify the rise of Babylon and its patron god Marduk, or a purely religious text about the ordering of the cosmos from chaos. Sitchin bypassed this debate entirely, declaring it a work of advanced planetary science passed down by the Anunnaki themselves. Now let's zoom forward billions of years. On this planet Nibiru, a race of intelligent beings evolves. They are the Anunnaki. They are humanoid, but not human. They are tall, perhaps 8 or 9 feet, with pale skin and dark hair. They are technologically advanced, capable of space travel, and possess a biology that allows them to live for hundreds of thousands of years. Their long lifespan is a direct consequence of their planet's enormous orbit. One of their years is equivalent to 3,600 of ours. So, when an ancient text says a god lived for 10,000 years, Sitchin sees not a mythological number, but a simple calculation. That being had lived for less than 3 Nibiru years. Life on Nibiru, however, is not perfect. Sitchin proposed that their long, elliptical orbit created a severe atmospheric problem. As Nibiru travels far out into deep space, away from the sun's warmth, its atmosphere begins to dissipate, threatening all life on the planet. The Anunnaki scientists, brilliant as they are, devise a desperate solution. They need to create a shield, a layer of fine gold particles suspended in their upper atmosphere to reflect heat back and prevent further atmospheric loss. Think of it as a planetary emergency blanket. It's a clever idea, but it has one major flaw. Nibiru doesn't have enough gold. So the Anunnaki Council, led by their ruler Anu, begins to search the solar system for the precious metal. Their probes and surveys eventually lead them to the third rock from the sun, Earth. The blue planet, the remnant of the great Tiamat, is rich in gold. The decision is made. An expedition must be launched. A team of Anunnaki must travel to Earth and establish a mining operation to save their home world. This is the central premise of Sitchin's entire saga. The arrival of the gods was not a random visitation or a mission of exploration. It was a colonial expedition driven by industrial necessity. A mainstream historical fact is that the Babylonians were meticulous astronomers who kept detailed records of celestial movements, known as astronomical diaries. They charted the paths of the visible planets and could predict eclipses. They did associate these planets with their gods, Jupiter with Marduk, Venus with Ishtar. Sitchin took this a step further, claiming they knew of all the planets, including Neptune and Uranus, which weren't officially discovered until the 18th and 19th centuries, and, of course, the unseen 12th planet, Nibiru, counting the sun and moon as part of the 10. A quirky and perhaps telling tidbit is that Sitchin's 12th planet theory requires this specific number. He arrives at 12 by counting the sun, the moon, and the 9 known planets, plus Nibiru. This convenient number then matches the 12 members of the High Council of the Gods in some Sumerian texts. It's a neat piece of numerology, but one that falls apart if you, for instance, don't count the sun and moon as planets, or if you consider the reclassification of Pluto. The whole cosmic system is based on some very specific counting choices. And so, about 450,000 years ago, according to this timeline, the first Anunnaki craft splashes down in the Persian Gulf. The commander of this first mission is none other than Enki, the master scientist and engineer. His mission, to establish a base Eridu, the home in the faraway, And to begin the great galactic gold rush, your feet are now on the soil of a prehistoric Earth, but not as a lone, vulnerable human. In your mind's eye, you are one of them. One of the Anunnaki. You've just endured a long, arduous journey through the hostile vacuum of space. The landing was rough, but successful. Your commander, the brilliant and charismatic Enki, leads the first party ashore. The air on this planet is thick, dense with oxygen, almost intoxicating compared to the thinning atmosphere of Nibiru. The gravity feels heavy, oppressive, making your tall frame feel sluggish. This world is beautiful, wild, and teeming with strange forms of life, but you are not here as a tourist. You are here to work. According to Sitchin's narrative, the initial plan was straightforward. The Anunnaki would extract gold from the waters of the Persian Gulf. Enki, the god of water, was the perfect leader for this task. The first settlement, Eridu, was established as a base of operations. But the process was slow and inefficient. The yields were far too low to meet the desperate needs of the home planet. The reports sent back to Nibiru were grim. The mission was on the verge of failure. This is when the Great Council on Nibiru makes a change in leadership. Anu, the king, sends Enki's half-brother, Enlil, to take overall command of the Earth mission. Enlil, the stern administrator, arrives with a new mandate. He assesses the situation and declares the water mining project a failure. The real gold, the mother lode, is deep within the earth, in the rich veins of what is now southern Africa. The entire operation must be shifted from a small-scale water-sifting project to a massive, industrial deep earth mining expedition, and so new cities are founded, each with a specific purpose, laid out in a deliberate grid that Sitchin claims corresponds to flight paths and landing corridors. There's a mission control center, a spaceport, a metallurgical center. This isn't a simple settlement anymore. It's a full-blown colonial infrastructure. And you, as one of the rank-and-file Anunnaki, are sent to the mines. The work is brutal. For thousands and thousands of years, your life is a cycle of toil. You descend into the dark, hot, dangerous shafts deep in the African earth. You drill, you blast, you haul rocks heavy with the precious metal. It's grueling, back-breaking labor. Remember, you weren't created for this. You are a member of a sophisticated, spacefaring race, and you're being used as a beast of burden. Sitchin weaves this story from various Sumerian texts. He points to the myth of Enlil's rise to power on Earth, and his conflicts with Enki as a historical record of this command change. He interprets texts describing the founding of the first Sumerian cities as literal accounts of the Anunnaki setting up their bases. A mainstream historical fact is that the ancient Sumerians were indeed miners. They mined for copper, tin, and other metals which were crucial for the Bronze Age. They created sophisticated bronze alloys for their tools and weapons. They also highly valued gold for its beauty, incorruptibility, and religious significance, using it to adorn temples and statues of their gods. There is, however, no archaeological evidence whatsoever of any kind of prehistoric, industrial-scale gold mining operation in southern Africa 400,000 years ago. The Anunnaki workforce is divided into two groups. There is the High Command, the elite like Enlil and Enki, who manage the operation from their comfortable compounds in Mesopotamia. And then there are the worker gods. Sitchin points to a group of deities in the Mesopotamian pantheon called the Igigi and identifies them as the Anunnaki who were tasked with the actual labor. In some Mesopotamian myths, the Igigi are described as a group of younger gods who dwell in the heavens and serve the more powerful Anunnaki. Sitchin recasts them not as heavenly beings, but as astronauts who were forced to remain in orbit around Earth, manning the shuttlecraft that would ferry the refined gold up to the motherships. A quirky, fringe tidbit in all this is the idea that the Anunnaki were essentially cosmic 49ers. They weren't benevolent explorers or spiritual guides. They were prospectors in a galactic gold rush. This recast the entire God narrative into a story of capitalism and labor. The gods weren't creating humanity out of love. They were solving a resource problem. This cynical, Materialistic motive is one of the things that makes Sitchin's story feel so strangely modern and resonant to some. But the resentment among the working-class Anunnaki, both those in the mines and the Ijajai in orbit, is growing. Millennia pass. The toil is endless. The home planet, Nibiru, keeps demanding more gold, more shipments, faster production. The commanders, like Enlil, are harsh and demanding. The conditions are terrible. Slowly, a dangerous idea begins to circulate through the dark mines and the orbiting space stations. A whisper of discontent grows into a roar of defiance. The workers have had enough. They've spent tens of thousands of Earth years breaking their backs for a home they can no longer remember clearly. They are tired, they are angry, and they are about to do something that will change the course of history for this planet forever. They are going on strike. The whisper has become a plan. The heat in the mines is no longer just the oppressive heat of the deep earth. It's the heat of collective anger. You stand with the others, your sophisticated digging tools, your laser cutters and sonic pulverizers, feeling impossibly heavy in your hands. 440 shars, 40 orbits of Nibiru. This has been your life. 144,000 Earth years of dust, darkness, and unrelenting labor. You look at the faces of your comrades, beings of immense intellect and longevity, reduced to little more than organic machinery. The decision ripples through the ranks almost silently, a shared thought that needs no words. Enough. The moment comes. With a great crashing roar that echoes through the tunnels, the tools are thrown down. Not just set aside, but destroyed. They are tossed into piles and melted with their own energy beams, a symbolic act of defiance. We will not use these again. The great mining operation, the very reason for this entire colonial enterprise, grinds to a halt. Then the long march begins. Out of the mines of southern Africa, across the plains and deserts, you and the thousands of other striking Anunnaki make your way north, toward the heart of the operation in Mesopotamia, toward Enlil's command center, the city of Nippur. This entire dramatic scene comes from Sitchin's interpretation of a single, incredible ancient text, the Atrahasis epic. In the mainstream academic view, scholars still argue whether the Atrahasis epic is primarily a theological text explaining the creation of humanity to relieve the gods of toil, or if it's a story focused on the reasons for the Great Flood, with the creation part being a mere prologue. It tells the story of how the lesser gods, the Ijajai, had to do all the work, digging the rivers and canals, and how they eventually rebelled. Sitchin, of course, reads this not as theology, but as a transcript of events. A quirky, if central, tidbit of his theory is that he presents the dialogue from the epic as verbatim quotes from the Anunnaki leaders. The text says, "For 40 years they bore the toil. They complained, they backbited, they grumbled in the excavations. The rebellion culminates in a dramatic scene. The striking gods burn their spades and shovels and surround the temple of the chief god, Enlil, and that's exactly what you do. You arrive in Nippur, a great throng of furious, exhausted workers. You surround Enlil's compound, your numbers swelling, your anger a palpable force. Enlil, the great and powerful commander of the Earth mission, is terrified. The ancient text describes him as being deeply shaken. His vizier comes to him and says, "My lord, the Ijajai are surrounding your gate." Enlil, the galaxy's worst boss, panics. He bolts the doors. He has a full-scale insurrection on his hands, and there's no cosmic HR department to call. An emergency council is called. Enlil, shaken and furious, demands to know who is leading the rebellion. He wants to punish them, to make an example of them. But Enki, the clever scientist, is there, and so is their father, Anu, the king, patched in via some kind of long-range communication from Nibiru, the ultimate long-distance management call. The strikers are brought in to plead their case. The work is too hard, they cry. The toil is killing us. And, this idea of a workers' strike isn't some modern invention. The very first recorded labor strike in history is a mainstream historical fact that occurred in the 12th century BC at Deir el-Medina in Egypt. The artisans and craftsmen who were building the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings laid down their tools and refused to work because their grain rations were severely late. Their protest chant, recorded on papyrus, was simple, "We are hungry." The complaints of your Anunnaki comrades are eerily similar. The conditions are unbearable, the work is endless, and the leadership is unresponsive. Anu, the king, hears the complaints of the striking workers and shows a surprising amount of sympathy. He agrees that the work is too hard. But the gold is still needed. Nibiru is still dying. The mission must continue. A solution must be found that doesn't involve forcing his people to perform this kind of brutal labor. Enlil is at a loss. His only solution is force, but that would mean a civil war among the Anunnaki millions of miles from home. All eyes in the council turn to the one being who might have a clever, unconventional answer. Enki, the master biologist and geneticist, has been quiet for most of the meeting. He has been listening, calculating. His mind is not on the politics of the situation, but on the practicalities. He needs a new workforce. A workforce that is strong enough for the labor, intelligent enough to follow commands, but not so intelligent that they'll get any funny ideas about unionizing in a few millennia. His gaze, in Sitchin's telling, drifts toward the strange, primitive creatures he has seen roaming the plains of Africa. The hairy, upright-walking ape-men that live in the wild. They are physically robust, adapted to Earth's gravity and environment. But their minds are too simple. They are not yet suitable. A spark of an idea ignites in Enki's mind. A breathtakingly audacious, ethically questionable, and world-altering idea. What if he doesn't have to find a primitive worker? What if he could make one? The air in the council room is thick with anticipation. You watch as Enki, the master scientist, finally looks up, a glint of audacious genius in his eyes. He addresses the tense assembly, his furious brother Enlil, his concerned father Anu on the cosmic conference call, and the anxious representatives of the striking miners. His solution is elegant, insane, and utterly unprecedented. He doesn't need to find a new worker. He will create one. Let us create a Lulu, he says, using his term for a primitive worker. Let him bear the yoke. Let him do the work of the gods. He proposes taking one of the primitive, ape-like hominids already roaming this planet, a creature Sitchin identifies as Homo erectus, and improving it. Upgrading the hardware. He will bind upon it the image of the gods. This is Sitchin's masterstroke of reinterpretation, the famous line from Genesis, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness," is presented not as a divine creation by God, but as a direct quote from a committee of aliens deciding on a genetic engineering project. Enlil is aghast. The idea is grotesque, a violation of nature. He probably would have preferred to solve the strike with a series of very strongly worded memos. But Anu, the pragmatic king on Nibiru, is intrigued. The gold must flow. The mission is paramount. He gives his approval. Let it be so. The scene shifts. You are now in Enki's laboratory, a place the text call the Shimti, the house where the wind of life is breathed in. It is not a sterile, white room of chrome and glass. Imagine a chamber deep within the temple complex at Eridu, filled with strange humming equipment, bubbling vats of colored liquids, and shelves lined with clay jars containing biological samples. Here, Enki is joined by the chief medical officer of the Anunnaki, a brilliant goddess of birth and healing named Ninhursag, also called Ninti, the Lady of the Rib. The plan is laid out. They need two key components. First, the egg of a female Homo erectus captured from the wild. You can imagine a tense scene in the African savanna, the Anunnaki using advanced, non-lethal technology to sedate and capture a suitable specimen, a creature both terrified and awestruck by these giant beings from the sky. The second component is the essence of a young Anunnaki male, his genetic material. The text says they will mix the two in a purifying bath. The clay mentioned in the creation myths is, in Sitchin's view, the earthly biological medium, the hominid egg cell. Ninhursag takes the lead. This is her area of expertise. The process is delicate, a form of in vitro fertilization and genetic splicing on a cosmic scale. A mainstream historical fact to ground us here: Homo erectus was a real and incredibly successful early human ancestor who lived from about 2 million to 100,000 years ago. They were the first to control fire, use sophisticated stone tools like the Acheulean hand axe, and migrate out of Africa. They were intelligent survivors, not mindless beasts. But in this story, their destiny is to be raw material. The first attempts are a disaster. This is the part of the story that draws from a truly strange Sumerian myth, the story of Enki and Ninmah, another name for Ninhursag. In the original myth, the two gods get drunk at a party and have a contest to create humans, resulting in a series of beings with various disabilities. Sitchin reinterprets this not as a drunken competition, but as a sober, desperate process of trial and error. A quirky tidbit is that these texts describe the creation of a being who cannot hold back his urine, a barren woman, and a creature with no sex organs. For Sitchin, these are not moral allegories but the failed lab notes of their early experiments. It's cosmic trial and error, a bit like trying to assemble IKEA furniture without the instructions, only instead of a wobbly bookshelf, you get a genetically flawed sentient being. Ninhursag is frustrated. "My creation is not perfect," she laments, according to the texts. Enki encourages her to keep trying. They refine the process, adjust the genetic sequences, and finally, they create a perfect, viable embryo. But another problem arises. The genetically engineered egg cannot be implanted back into a female Homo erectus. The new creation is too different, too advanced. The surrogate mother's body would reject it. They need a womb that is closer to the gods. They need an Anunnaki surrogate. At a moment of supreme sacrifice for the project, Ninhursag, the chief medical officer herself, volunteers. She will be the birth mother for this new species. The embryo is implanted in her womb. The tension is immense. For months, the fate of the entire Earth mission rests on the success of this pregnancy. Finally, the moment arrives. Ninhursag goes into labor. The birth is difficult, but successful. She holds up the newborn. "I have created it," she cries. "My hands have made it. The baby is perfect. It has the features of the Anunnaki, but the robust, Earth-adapted biology of its hominid ancestors." They call him Amu, a name which Sitchin links not just to the biblical Adam, but to the Sumerian one who is of the earth. He is the first of his kind, the prototype, the Lulu Amalu, the mixed worker. His job description is simple: be strong, follow orders, and don't ask for weekends off. The labor problem is solved. The rebellion is over. The gold mines of Africa now have a new, self-replicating, and, most importantly, disposable workforce. Humanity's strange and sorrowful dawn has arrived. And scholars still argue whether the figure of the culture bringer in many mythologies, a god who teaches humanity arts and sciences, represents a memory of a specific historical leader or a metaphor for the gradual process of societal development. In this tale, Enki is the most literal culture bringer imaginable. He didn't just bring culture, he brought the beings who would build it. The silence in the laboratory is broken by a baby's cry. Adamu, the first human, is a success. The prototype is perfect. You can almost feel the collective, galaxy-spanning sigh of relief from the Anunnaki. The striking miners have been pacified with the promise of a replacement workforce. The gold operation can, in theory, resume. But there's a rather obvious logistical problem. One baby isn't going to dig a planet's worth of gold. Ninhursag, heroic as she was, can't spend the next few centuries as a perpetual birth surrogate. They have the blueprint, now they need a factory. It's time to scale up from artisanal, handcrafted humans to full factory settings. This is where Sitchin delves into the details of his interpreted texts. Enki and Ninhursag gather a team. The texts mention 14 birth goddesses being assembled, 7 on one side, 7 on the other, with a brick of destiny between them. In the standard mythological view, this is symbolic language about the creation of mortals. In Sitchin's view, This is a literal description of a production line. 14 Anunnaki females volunteer to be the surrogates, the living incubators for this new species. Using the genetic template from Adamu, they are able to produce clones. But a workforce of only males is inefficient. They need to create a female counterpart. Using the same process, they engineer a female. And here Sitchin makes one of his most famous linguistic leaps. The story of Eve being created from Adam's rib in Genesis has always been a bit of a puzzle. Sitchin offers a solution via Sumerian wordplay. In Sumerian, the word ti, pronounced T, has two distinct meanings. It means rib, but it also means life. So when the ancient texts speak of Ninhursag, whose epithet was Ninti or the Lady of the Rib, they were also, by a pun, calling her the Lady of Life. Sitchin argues that the biblical authors, working from much older Sumerian sources, picked the wrong meaning, giving us the strange story of a surgery instead of a story of life-giving genetics. This is a classic Sitchin tidbit, a quirky linguistic sleight of hand that seems to unlock a hidden meaning. And so the female Tiamat, or the Maiden of Life, is created. You have your Adam and Eve. These first humans are not let loose in the wild. They are placed in a special enclosed area in Mesopotamia that Sitchin calls Eden, which he translates as home of the righteous ones. This is his Garden of Eden. It's not a magical paradise of innocence, but a high-security biological preserve with great landscaping. It's an open-air laboratory where the Anunnaki can observe their new creations, train them for the tasks ahead, and ensure they are behaving as expected. The biblical description of Eden being bordered by 4 rivers, including the Tigris and the Euphrates, is for Sitchin a literal geographical marker. But there is a feature, or rather a bug, that the Anunnaki intentionally engineered into these first models. Adamu and Tiamat, and all the clones produced from their template, are sterile. They are hybrids, a cross between 2 different species, Anunnaki and Homo erectus. Like a mule, the offspring of a horse and a donkey, they are strong and useful, but they cannot procreate on their own. This was a deliberate design choice by Enlil, the cautious commander. He wanted a workforce, not a new race that could multiply uncontrollably and potentially become a threat. Population control was baked into their very genetics. This concept of useful but sterile hybrids is not fantasy. It's a mainstream historical fact that ancient societies were masters of animal husbandry. The Mesopotamians, for example, were creating sophisticated hybrids thousands of years ago. They bred male donkeys with female onagers, a type of wild ass, to create a powerful and highly prized equine called a kunga. These kungas were stronger and faster than donkeys and easier to tame than onagers, and they were used to pull the war wagons of the elite for centuries before the horse was widely introduced to the region. The ancients understood that you could crossbreed for desirable traits, and that sometimes the offspring couldn't make more of themselves. So here you have the first humans living in their beautiful prison, their Eden. They are strong, intelligent enough to learn commands, and blissfully unaware of what they are. Their lives are simple. They tend the gardens, they serve the gods, and they live out their days. It's not a bad gig perhaps, but being a perfectly engineered, sterile mining slave probably wasn't on anyone's long-term career vision board. Biblical scholars still argue whether the Garden of Eden story is a purely allegorical tale about innocence and temptation, or if it contains echoes of a folk memory of a specific, lush region in ancient Mesopotamia that was eventually lost to desertification. But one of their creators is not satisfied. Enki, the brilliant scientist, watches his creations. He didn't just see them as Lulus, primitive workers. He saw a spark of his own people in them. He felt a paternal pride, a connection. He saw their potential, a potential that was being deliberately stifled by his brother Enlil's paranoia. This sterile, dead-end species felt like a waste, an unfinished symphony. And so, in an act of rebellious compassion that would forever change the destiny of this planet, Enki decides to go behind his brother's back. He will give his children one final, unauthorized upgrade. He will give them the knowledge they lack. He will give them the ability to reproduce. You are standing in the Eden, the Anunnaki Biological Preserve. There is fragrant with flowers and fruit trees you've never seen before. The primitive workers, the first humans, go about their tasks with a placid, unquestioning obedience. They are strong, healthy, and completely unaware of their own nature. To you, an Anunnaki, they might look like sophisticated pets. But one of your leaders, Enki, sees them differently. He sees his own reflection in their eyes. He sees a future that his brother, Enlil, is determined to prevent. Enlil is pleased with the status quo. The humans are excellent workers. They are replacing the striking miners in the African gold operations, and most importantly, their population is completely under Anunnaki control. They cannot procreate. They are a manageable biological tool. But Enki, the scientist who engineered them, feels this is a profound injustice. He has a soft spot for his creation. This is the moment where Sitchin's narrative collides head-on with one of the most famous stories in Western culture, the temptation in the Garden of Eden. The villain of that story, as we know it, is the serpent. But in Sitchin's retelling, the serpent is the hero. The Sumerian symbol for Enki was often two intertwined serpents, a motif that represented his mastery of medicine and genetics, and which survives today as the caduceus, the symbol of the medical profession. So when the Bible speaks of a serpent tempting Eve, Sitchin claims this is a symbolic memory of Enki himself, approaching his creations in defiance of Enlil's strict orders. Enlil had forbidden the humans from partaking of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Sitchin translates this not as a moral lesson about disobedience, but as a literal, biological event. The fruit wasn't an apple. It was another dose of genetic manipulation. The knowledge wasn't about morality. It was the biological knowledge of procreation. Enki, as the serpent, approaches Adamu and Tiamat, Adam and Eve. He tells them they have been lied to. He explains that by partaking of this forbidden fruit, they will be as gods, meaning they will gain the ability to create life as the Anunnaki do. He performs a second, secret genetic procedure, activating their dormant reproductive capabilities. And with that, Humanity 2.0 is released. The upgrade is complete. Suddenly, Adam and Eve look at each other and realize they are naked. This isn't a moment of shame, Sitchin argues, but a moment of sexual awakening. They are now fully sentient, sexually mature beings. When Enlil discovers this act of sabotage, he is livid. He storms through the garden, calling for his rogue scientist brother and his newly enlightened pets. He sees that the humans are now wearing makeshift coverings, a clear sign that Enki's plan has worked. The man has become as one of us, he rages, to know good and evil. For Sitchin, good and evil is a mistranslation of a Sumerian term meaning to know the difference between things, to have true consciousness. Enlil's greatest fear has come to pass. The primitive workers can now reproduce on their own. They are no longer a controllable tool, but a competing species. Furious, he banishes them from the pen, casting them out into the wilderness to fend for themselves. This isn't a divine punishment for sin. It's a panicked, angry administrator kicking his failed experiment out the door. Humanity begins to multiply, just as Enlil feared. They spread across the earth, intermarrying, building small communities. Some Anunnaki males stationed on Earth for long, lonely tours of duty begin to take human women as wives. A practice Sitchin connects to the biblical passage about the sons of God, who saw the daughters of men and took them as wives, producing the mighty men which were of old, men of renown. This further enrages Enlil. The whole project is spiraling out of his control. The planet is being overrun by these noisy, chaotic, hybrid creatures. He wants them gone. All of them. And then a perfect opportunity arises. The Anunnaki scientists, with their advanced knowledge of orbital mechanics and geology, know that a massive natural cataclysm is coming. A mainstream historical fact is that the last ice age ended around 12,000 years ago, resulting in a dramatic rise in sea levels as the massive ice sheets over Antarctica and the poles melted. This period, known as the Younger Dryas, was a time of immense climatic instability and catastrophic flooding in many parts of the world. Sitchin claims the Anunnaki knew that the Antarctic ice sheet was about to slip into the ocean, which would trigger a tidal wave of unimaginable proportions, a global deluge that would wipe the slate clean. Enlil sees this as his chance. His plan is simple: do nothing. Just let nature take its course. He makes all the other Anunnaki swear an oath of secrecy. They are not to warn the humans. They will retreat to their spacecraft, ride out the flood in orbit, and when they return, the planet will be cleansed of their failed experiment. But Enki is horrified. He cannot stand by and watch his children be exterminated. Bound by the oath not to speak to any human directly, he devises a clever workaround. He goes to the hut of his most loyal human follower, a man the Babylonians called Utnapishtim and the Bible calls Noah. Enki doesn't speak to Noah directly. He pretends to speak to the reed wall of the hut, knowing Noah is on the other side. Reed hut, wall, wall, he says, reciting instructions from the ancient texts. Dismantle your house, build a boat, forsake possessions, and save life. He gives him precise technical specifications for building a submersible vessel, submarine, to survive the coming wave. Historians and geologists still argue about the extent and nature of a great flood, with most evidence pointing to massive but localized river floods in Mesopotamia, which were likely the origin of the later mythologized global flood stories. Sitchin, of course, insists it was a global, tsunami-like event, just as the Bible says. The stage is set for a final epic confrontation between the two Anunnaki brothers over the ultimate fate of humankind. The sky darkens. A terrifying, deep rumble echoes from the bottom of the world. You are with Noah or Utnapishtim, if you prefer the Babylonian original, huddled inside the vessel you've built according to the strange, disembodied instructions. The craft is sealed tight with bitumen, a naturally occurring asphalt the Mesopotamians used for waterproofing. A mainstream historical fact is that the use of bitumen as a sealant for boats, buildings, and even mummification was widespread in the ancient Near East. The famous bitumen pits near the ancient city of Hit are still active today. You've gathered your family and the seed of all living things, as instructed by your mysterious divine benefactor Enki. Then the wave hits, a wall of water that blots out the sky, lifting your vessel and tossing it like a nutshell on a furious ocean. From the safety of their orbiting spacecraft, the Anunnaki watch the devastation. Sitchin paints a vivid picture of even the gods being terrified by the scale of the cataclysm they have allowed to unfold. The texts describe the goddess Inanna weeping for her lost people. The gods, cowering like dogs, crouched against the outer wall. The Epic of Gilgamesh reads, "This wasn't a clean, sterile cleansing. It was a horror show." When the waters finally begin to recede, the Anunnaki land their craft on the highest peak, Mount Ararat. They look out upon a world wiped clean, a muddy, silent wasteland. Enlil is satisfied. His noisy human problem has been solved. And then a thin plume of smoke rises from a nearby peak. The smell of cooking meat reaches the hungry gods. Enlil is shocked, then furious. Someone survived. He sees the strange boat and Noah's family emerging. Who has escaped, he roars. No man was to survive the destruction. He immediately knows who is responsible. His eyes fall on his brother, Enki, who steps forward and confesses. A fierce argument breaks out right there on the muddy mountaintop. Enki argues passionately for the humans. He calls them his children. He praises their resilience and their intelligence. He convinces Enlil that wiping them out was a mistake and that they should be allowed to flourish to build a new civilization from the ashes. Reluctantly, moved by the sight of the hardy survivors, Enlil agrees. Humanity gets a second chance. This is the reset button for civilization in Sitchin's timeline. The Anunnaki decide to change their relationship with humanity. Instead of using them as slaves, they will rule over them as kings. They will reestablish the cities, starting with Kish, and they will teach humanity the arts of civilization all over again. And to do this, they will appoint human rulers to act as intermediaries, as priest kings who will manage the population on their behalf. And this brings us to one of Sitchin's most powerful pieces of supposed evidence, the Sumerian king list. This is a real archaeological artifact, an ancient cuneiform tablet that lists the rulers of Sumer, the cities they ruled from, and the lengths of their reigns. It's an incredible document, but it contains a rather glaring chronological problem. The list is divided into two parts, the kings who ruled before the Great Flood and the kings who ruled after. You run your finger down the pre-flood section of the list. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. In Eridu, Al-Ulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Alaugar ruled for 36,000 years. 2 kings, 64,800 years. The list continues like this, with 8 kings and 5 cities reigning for a total of 241,200 years. Then it states simply, then the flood swept over. After the flood, the list resumes. After the flood swept over, and the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. The kings who rule after the flood also have remarkably long reigns. One rules for 1,200 years, another for 900. But as the list gets closer to the historical period we can verify around 2500 BC, the lifespans start to become normal. Dozens of years. Plausible human lifetimes. For mainstream historians, the impossibly long reigns of the early kings are clearly mythological. The numbers are symbolic, likely based on the Sumerian sexagesimal, base 60, numbering system, and intended to convey a sense of a distant, God-touched golden age. Historians still debate whether the Sumerian king list was a political tool created to legitimize a specific dynasty by linking it to a glorious ancient past, or a genuine, if flawed, attempt at historiography. But for Sitchin, this isn't myth, it's data. He asks a simple question: who were these kings who could live for tens of thousands of years? The answer is obvious in his framework. They weren't humans. They were the Anunnaki themselves, ruling directly over the nascent human population. Al-Ulim and Alaugar weren't human kings. They were Anunnaki governors. Their long lifespans make perfect sense when you remember that 1 Nibiru year is 3,600 Earth years. A quirky thought experiment. If you were an Anunnaki, a 28,800 year reign would only feel like 8 years to you. Not a bad term limit. The gradual shortening of the lifespans after the flood represents the Anunnaki slowly handing over the reins of power to human Anunnaki hybrids, the demigods, whose lifespans were shorter, and then finally to purebred human kings. The king list, for Sitchin, is the smoking gun. It's a dynastic record that perfectly documents the transition from alien rule to human sovereignty. It's the ultimate proof that our history began with rulers who were not from this world. With a king list as your guide, you now turn your attention from the text to the artifacts. If a race of technologically advanced beings lived on Earth for hundreds of thousands of years, establishing cities, spaceports, and mining operations, surely they would have left behind more than just stories. They would have left pictures. They would have left traces of their technology. Proponents of the ancient astronaut theory, Sitchin included, argue that they did exactly that. The evidence, they claim, is hiding in plain sight, carved into the stone reliefs and baked into the clay seals of ancient Mesopotamia and beyond. You just have to know how to look at them. You're standing in a museum, in front of a giant carved stone panel from an Assyrian palace. It depicts a winged figure, a protective genie, with the muscular body of a man and the head of an eagle. He holds a small cone-shaped object in one hand and what looks like a small bucket or a handbag in the other. To a mainstream historian, this is a clear and well-understood piece of religious iconography. The figure is an Apkallu, a divine sage from the time before the flood. The pine cone, dipped in the bucket of sacred water, is being used to ritually purify the king or the palace. It's a symbolic act of blessing and protection, but to an ancient astronaut theorist, this is not symbolism. This is a schematic. What is that cone? Could it be some kind of tool? A weapon? A genetic device? And what about the strange wrist object the figure is wearing? It looks uncannily like a modern wristwatch. Is this a representation of an Anunnaki, complete with his advanced, high-tech gear? The theory suggests that the wings aren't literal bird wings, but a symbolic representation of his ability to fly, perhaps a stylized depiction of a jetpack or a personal flight device. A joke for you. If this was a jetpack, you have to admit the user manual, dip cone and bucket, seems a little vague for a piece of advanced aerospace technology. You move on to another artifact, a small cylindrical seal. These seals, a mainstream historical fact, were a cornerstone of Mesopotamian administration. They were rolled across wet clay to create a unique, repeating impression that served as a signature or a mark of ownership. Thousands of them have been found. One in particular, known as VA-243, has become a poster child for the Anunnaki theory. It depicts several seated figures and, most importantly, a celestial body in the sky surrounded by smaller spheres. Sitchin famously declared this to be a clear depiction of our solar system. He identifies the central star as the sun and counts the surrounding dots as the planets. But there's a problem. The seal shows not 9, but 11 bodies orbiting the sun. Sitchin triumphantly proclaims this is irrefutable proof. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Moon, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and the undiscovered 12th planet, Nibiru. Mainstream Assyriologists, however, have a much simpler explanation. They identify the central symbol not as the sun, but as a star, and the surrounding dots as other stars. The depiction is likely the Pleiades star cluster, a celestial grouping that was very important in Mesopotamian religious and agricultural calendars. Scholars still debate the precise astronomical meaning of many symbols on cylinder seals, but the consensus is that VA-243 is a standard astrological or mythological scene, not a scientifically accurate map of the solar system. The interpretation of this seal as a planetary chart is exclusive to Sitchin and his followers. The hunt for ancient tech doesn't stop in Mesopotamia. Proponents of the theory cast their nets wide, pulling in anomalies from all over the ancient world and attributing them to the Anunnaki or other alien visitors. You examine the famous Dendera light relief from the Temple of Hathor in Egypt. It shows figures holding what looks like a giant light bulb, complete with a filament and a cable running to a power pack. Is this proof of ancient electricity? Or is it, as Egyptologists explain, a symbolic representation from Egyptian mythology, depicting a serpent, the filament, being born from a lotus flower, the bulb, a standard creation motif? You look at images of the Saqqara bird, a small wooden artifact found in an Egyptian tomb that looks remarkably like a modern glider. Is it a model of a real aircraft? Or is it, as experts suggest, a stylized falcon, a common motif that probably sat atop a ceremonial mast? What about the Baghdad battery, a clay pot containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod found near ancient Baghdad? When filled with an acidic liquid like vinegar, it can produce a small electrical charge. A quirky tidbit is that experiments have shown it really does work as a rudimentary battery. Was it used for some lost technological purpose like electroplating? Or was it, as many archaeologists believe, simply a storage vessel for sacred scrolls, where the different metals have corroded together over time, creating the battery-like structure by accident? For every mysterious artifact, there are two competing explanations. One involves advanced extraterrestrial technology, forgotten after the gods left. The other involves symbolism, ritual, and the known capabilities of ancient human cultures. Sitchin and his proponents see rockets, airplanes, and genetic engineering equipment hidden in the art. Mainstream scholars see gods, myths, and purification rituals. The Anunnaki theory requires you to believe that our ancestors were literalists, that when they carved a winged man, they meant a man with a flying machine, that when they drew a god in a fiery chariot, they were drawing a spaceship. It asks you to see every strange symbol not as a product of a rich and complex mythological imagination, but as a Polaroid snapshot of alien technology. And that choice, that interpretive leap, is what separates the historian from the true believer. You've seen the proof in the artifacts and the king lists. You've heard the grand, sweeping narrative of planets colliding and humans being engineered in a lab. It's a compelling, all-encompassing story. But now, you must turn your attention to the foundation upon which this entire towering edifice is built, Zacharias Sitchin's translations of the cuneiform texts. Because if his translations are wrong, the entire theory collapses. Not just a part of it, all of it. The 12th planet, the gold mining mission, the rebellion, the genetic engineering. It all comes from his specific, unique, and highly controversial reading of those ancient clay tablets. You are back in that quiet library, but this time you're sitting at a table with two books open. On one side is Sitchin's The 12th Planet. On the other is a standard academic Sumerian lexicon, a dictionary compiled by decades of painstaking work by hundreds of mainstream scholars. This is where the war of words happens, not with explosions, but with etymology. Let's start with the name of the main characters, the Anunnaki. As we discussed, the consensus translation is something like princely offspring, or those of royal blood, derived from Anu, the sky god, Nahav, and Ki, earth, though the precise meaning is debated. Sitchin, however, came up with a completely different translation. He broke the word down as Anunnaki and translated it as those who from heaven to earth came. This one translation changes everything. Princely offspring describes who they are. Those who from heaven to earth came describes what they did. It transforms their very name into a mission statement for extraterrestrial visitation. Mainstream cuneiform experts are united on this point. Sitchin's translation of Anunnaki is linguistically impossible. It doesn't follow the established rules of Sumerian grammar. This pattern repeats with almost every key term in his theory. Take Nibiru, the name of the 12th planet. A mainstream historical fact is that the word Nibiru, or Nebru, does appear in Babylonian astronomical text, specifically in the Enuma Elish. However, it's not the name of a secret planet. The scholarly consensus is that Nibiru is a term for a specific point in the sky, a crossing point or ferry, most often associated with the planet Jupiter as it crosses the celestial meridian. It was a location, not a physical world. Scholars still debate whether Nibiru sometimes referred to the pole star or other celestial phenomena, but none of these interpretations involve a rogue planet with a 3,600-year orbit. Sitchin's entire cosmology hinges on a single word that he, and he alone, interprets a home world. Perhaps the most crucial term is Shem. In the Old Testament story of the Tower of Babel, the people build a tower with its top in the heavens to make a name for ourselves. The Hebrew word for name here is Shem. Sitchin looked at this and proposed a radical rereading. He noted that the word Shem has a root meaning that can imply that which is high up. He then looked at ancient Assyrian reliefs that depict rocket-like objects and claimed that the word Shem was the true name for these vehicles. He translated it as sky vehicle or rocket ship. A quirky tidbit, he even points to the shape of the top of an Egyptian obelisk, a pyramid, as being a Shem. So when the people of Babel were building a tower to make a Shem, they weren't trying to become famous. They were building a launch pad for their own rocket. This is a brilliant piece of storytelling, but according to every Hebrew and Akkadian linguist, it's completely fabricated. The word means name. The chasm between Sitchin and the academic world is not a matter of small disagreements. Mainstream scholars who have bothered to address his work, like Dr. Michael S. Heiser, who specialized in biblical studies in ancient Semitic languages, have systematically deconstructed his linguistic claims. They point out that Sitchin frequently pulls words from different languages, Sumerian, Akkadian, Hebrew, ignores grammatical context, and assigns meanings that are completely unsupported by the evidence. It's like a mechanic looking at a blueprint for a car, pointing to the word engine, and insisting it actually means waffle iron, and then building an entire theory of how cars are powered by breakfast foods. It just doesn't work. Sitchin's defenders argue that the academic world is a closed-minded club, an ivory tower conspiracy determined to suppress a truth that would append all of established history and religion. They claim that the scholars are simply protecting their own turf. It's a compelling David versus Goliath narrative. But the criticism isn't about protecting turf. It's about methodology. Sitchin's work was not peer-reviewed for a reason. It doesn't adhere to the basic principles of linguistic and historical analysis. He is accused of starting with a conclusion: aliens came to Earth to mine gold, and then forcing the ancient text, through faulty translations, to fit his predetermined narrative. This is the exact opposite of the scientific method. So you're left with a choice. Do you trust the global, multi-generational consensus of thousands of linguists and historians who have dedicated their lives to meticulously deciphering these ancient languages? Or do you trust one man, a brilliant storyteller and self-taught amateur, who claimed to have found a hidden code that everyone else had missed? The entire incredible story of the Anunnaki as ancient astronauts rests on the answer to that question. If the words on the clay don't mean what he said they mean, then the rockets, the gold mines, and the genetic labs all vanish, like a mirage in the Mesopotamian desert. Leaving the library of linguistic debates behind, you now step into the cold, clear, and unforgiving realm of astronomy. Even if we were to grant every one of Sitchin's controversial translations, his entire narrative depends on one enormous physical object, the planet Nibiru. Without Nibiru, there is no home world for the Anunnaki. Without Nibiru, there is no 3,600-year orbit to explain their long lifespans. Without Nibiru, there is no atmospheric crisis that necessitates a gold mining mission on Earth. The planet is the linchpin. So the question is simple. Could a planet like Nibiru actually exist in our solar system? You're now looking up at the night sky, but with the eyes of a modern astronomer. You can see past the visible light into the infrared. You can measure the minute gravitational wobbles of distant stars, and you can calculate the orbits of celestial bodies with breathtaking precision. For decades, astronomers have been searching for a hypothetical large planet in the outer solar system, often dubbed Planet X, or more recently, Planet 9. This search is based on a mainstream scientific hypothesis: the unusual clustered orbits of several small icy bodies in the Kuiper Belt, a region beyond Neptune, suggest they are being gravitationally herded by a large, unseen planet. At first glance, this might seem like a point for Sitchin. They're looking for a hidden planet. But when you look at the details, the Planet 9 hypothesis and Sitchin's Nibiru are two completely different beasts. The mainstream historical fact is that mathematical predictions have led to the discovery of planets before. The existence of Neptune was predicted in 1846 based on irregularities in the orbit of Uranus, a stunning triumph for celestial mechanics. The current search for Planet 9 follows that same scientific tradition. However, the proposed Planet 9 has an orbit estimated to be between 10,000 and 20,000 years long, and it would always remain in the distant, frigid outer solar system. Nibiru, by contrast, is supposed to have a 3,600-year orbit that brings it crashing through the inner solar system, passing between Mars and Jupiter. And this is where the theory runs into the buzzsaw of physics that a planet on such a highly elliptical orbit would be incredibly unstable. Every 3,600 years, it would cross the paths of Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and the asteroid belt. The gravitational influence of Jupiter, the colossal giant of our solar system, is immense. It acts as a cosmic bouncer, ejecting or absorbing comets and asteroids that stray too close. A body like Nibiru would have a very hard time maintaining a stable orbit over millions of years. The far more likely scenario, according to orbital dynamicists, is that within a few passes, Nibiru would either be flung out of the solar system entirely, crash into another planet, or have its orbit so severely altered that the 3,600-year periodicity would be destroyed. The clockwork regularity required by Sitchin's theory is, from a physics perspective, nearly impossible to maintain. Then there's the problem of detection. A planet large enough to be the home world of an advanced civilization, even one far from the sun, would still have a detectable presence. It would reflect a small amount of sunlight, and more importantly, it would emit its own heat in the infrared spectrum. All-sky surveys like the Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer WISE have scanned the heavens with incredible sensitivity. A quirky tidbit is that these surveys are so sensitive they can find cool. Dim objects like brown dwarfs, failed stars, hundreds of light years away. NASA stated in 2014, after the WISE survey was complete, that it had found no evidence of a Saturn-sized object in an orbit out to 10,000 astronomical units AU and no Jupiter-sized object out to 26,000 Australian dollars. In short, if a planet like Nibiru was out there, we almost certainly would have seen its heat signature by now. Astronomers still debate the exact mass and orbit of the hypothetical Planet 9, with some even proposing that the observed gravitational anomalies could be caused by a primordial black hole the size of a grapefruit instead of a planet. But even this fringe, yet scientifically plausible idea doesn't help the Nibiru theory. A grapefruit-sized black hole doesn't make a very good home world, unless the Anunnaki are really, really small and enjoy being crushed into a singularity. It's a bit of a fixer-upper real estate-wise. The predicted return of Nibiru has also become a recurring feature of doomsday predictions. Sitchin himself never set a specific date for its return, but his followers have repeatedly linked it to dates like 2003 and, most famously, the 2012 apocalypse phenomenon. When these dates passed with no sign of a rogue planet entering our solar system, the credibility of the claim took a significant hit. The fact that you can read this or listen to this right now is pretty solid evidence that a planet didn't come swooping through the asteroid belt a few years ago. So while the idea of a hidden planet is scientifically intriguing, the specific planet described by Sitchin, with its convenient 3,600-year orbit, its history of smashing into other planets, and its ability to elude all modern detection methods, seems to exist only in his translations, not in our sky. The astronomical evidence presents the formidable, perhaps insurmountable obstacle. The celestial stage for the Anunnaki drama appears to be empty. All right, let's play devil's advocate for a moment. Let's park our disbelief about the planet itself. We'll pretend that Nibiru is real, that it has a stable 3,600-year orbit, and that it has somehow evaded every telescope we've ever pointed at the sky. Let's accept this stage. Now we have to look at the play. The entire motive for the Anunnaki coming to Earth, the engine that drives Sitchin's whole narrative, is their desperate need for gold to save their dying atmosphere. So you are now the chief engineer on Nibiru, and this is your proposed solution. We will travel across the solar system to mine gold, grind it into a fine powder, and spray it into our upper atmosphere to create a reflective shield. Does this plan actually make any sense? First, let's tackle the physics of the solution itself. The idea is that these gold particles will remain suspended in the atmosphere, reflecting heat and light. But gold is heavy. It's one of the densest non-radioactive elements. Its atomic weight is 197. For comparison, the nitrogen that makes up most of our atmosphere has an atomic weight of 14. Even if you grind gold into the finest possible dust, a cloud of it would not stay suspended in a planet's upper atmosphere for very long. Gravity, that relentless cosmic party pooper, would simply pull it all back down. Their grand atmospheric shield will be less of a permanent solution and more of a very expensive, very brief cosmic glitter bomb. It would be a planetary solution that sounds suspiciously like something a dragon would come up with. Then there's the question of quantity. How much gold would you actually need to coat the atmosphere of an entire planet? Let's assume Nibiru is roughly Earth-sized. The surface area of the Earth is about 510 million square kilometers. To create even the thinnest, most gossamer-like layer of gold dust over such a vast area would require a truly colossal amount of the metal. Let's bring in a mainstream historical fact for scale. The total amount of gold ever mined in all of human history is estimated to be around 200,000 metric tons. You could fit all of it into a single cube with sides about 22 meters long. Now, does that sound like enough to create a planetary heat shield? It's barely enough to gold plate a decent-sized shopping mall. The Anunnaki supposedly spent over 400,000 years mining gold on Earth. Were they just exceptionally bad at it? Or is the amount of gold required by the theory simply not supported by the amount of gold available? And here's a quirky tidbit from actual Sumerian history that puts another dent in the gold is everything theory. For the ancient Mesopotamians, Gold was valuable, yes, but it often wasn't the most valuable material. That honor frequently went to lapis lazuli, deep blue metamorphic rock. Lapis was prized above almost all else for its intense color, which was associated with the heavens and divinity. All of the ancient world's lapis lazuli came from a single source, the Sarai Sang mines in a remote part of what is now Afghanistan. The Sumerians went to extraordinary lengths to trade for this blue stone. If the Anunnaki were so obsessed with a single precious material, why was their human proxy civilization so singularly focused on a pretty blue rock? This brings us to the biggest flaw of all, the logic of the solution. We are asked to believe in a civilization capable of interstellar space travel, of manipulating the very building blocks of life to create a new species, and whose members live for hundreds of thousands of years. And this is the best plan they could come up with. Spraying gold dust? Scientists and ethicists still argue whether large-scale atmospheric seeding, a concept known as geoengineering, will be a viable solution for our own climate change or a catastrophic risk that could backfire horribly. But even our 21st century geoengineering proposals involve more sophisticated ideas than this. Why not build a series of giant orbital mirrors to reflect sunlight? Why not use their mastery of energy to create fusion power plants to warm their world from the ground up? Why not just move? If your planet is dying and you have spaceships, finding a new, more stable home seems like a much better long-term strategy than patching up your old one with a solution that defies physics. For a race of supposed geniuses, the gold plan seems remarkably short-sighted and inefficient, which, frankly, seems like a pretty significant design flaw for a species that supposedly engineered us. The galactic gold rush makes for a fantastic story. It provides a simple, relatable motive survival for the gods' actions. But when you poke at it with the sticks of basic physics, geology, and logic, it begins to fall apart. The method is flawed, the quantities are insufficient, and the premise is illogical for a hyper-advanced race. The motive, the very reason for the Anunnaki's presence, seems to be built not on a foundation of rock, but on a fine, shimmering, and ultimately unstable layer of golden dust, so the grand cosmic gold rush seems to be a bust. The plan has more holes in it than a block of Swiss cheese dropped into a black hole. But that still leaves the other, more personal part of the story, us. Sitchin's narrative gives us a dramatic, if somewhat demeaning, origin. We are the product of a cosmic startup with questionable ethics, a genetically engineered slave race designed to solve a labor dispute. It's a powerful idea, suggesting our very existence is tied to the will and whims of these alien giants. But what if the real story of our creation is even more epic? What if you don't need to decipher ancient clay tablets to find it, because you carry the original document inside every cell of your body? You now leave the speculative world of Anunnaki laboratories and enter the very real world of genetics. The story of human origins is not written in cuneiform, but in the four-letter language of adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine, the building blocks of your DNA. A mainstream historical fact is that the discovery of the DNA double helix structure by James Watson and Francis Crick in 1953, with crucial, often uncredited, contributions from Rosalind Franklin, unlocked our ability to read this book of life. And what it tells us is a story far more complex, and in many ways more profound, than any tale of alien intervention. Let's meet our real Adam and Eve. They are not a single couple who lived in a guarded paradise. They are scientific concepts, anchor points in the great sprawling family tree of every human alive today. First, meet mitochondrial Eve. Deep inside your cells are tiny power plants called mitochondria, and they have their own separate strand of DNA called mtDNA. This mtDNA is passed down almost exclusively from a mother to her children. Your father's mtDNA doesn't make it past fertilization. This means your mtDNA is a direct copy of your mother's, which is a copy of her mother's, and so on, a perfect, unbroken line stretching back through tens of thousands of generations of women. By comparing the tiny mutations that accumulate in mtDNA over time from people all over the world, geneticists could trace this line all the way back to a single, common female ancestor for every person living on Earth today. This is mitochondrial Eve. This does not mean she was the only woman alive at her time. There were thousands of other women. But her maternal lineage is the only one that has survived to the present day. Think of it like this. She had at least one daughter, who had a daughter, who had a daughter, and so on in an unbroken chain right down to you. The other women of her time might have only had sons, or their female descendants eventually did, or their lines simply died out. She's not our only ancestor, but she is our most recent common matrilineal ancestor. She is the genetic Eve to us all. And science tells us she lived not 300,000 years ago in a lab, but roughly 150,000 to 200,000 years ago, somewhere in Africa. Then there's her partner in nomenclature, Y-chromosomal Adam. The Y chromosome is the bit of DNA that makes a baby male, and it's passed directly from father to son. Just like with mtDNA, scientists can trace the paternal line of every living male back to a single common male ancestor. And here's where it gets really interesting. Y-chromosomal Adam lived at a completely different time than mitochondrial Eve, likely much more recently, perhaps between 60,000 and 90,000 years ago. So, our ultimate genetic grandpappy and grandmommy were not a couple. They were separated by tens of thousands of years and likely never met. They wouldn't have even been able to awkwardly wave at each other across the savannah. A bad first date, you could say. This tells us something crucial that Sitchin's story misses. Our origin wasn't a single event, a creation of a perfect pair. It was a long, messy, and continuous process involving a large, interbreeding population of Homo sapiens in Africa. We weren't manufactured. We evolved. And our journey was not an easy one. A quirky, though sobering, tidbit is the Toba catastrophe theory. This hypothesis suggests that around 75,000 years ago, a supervolcano in what is now Indonesia erupted with a force thousands of times more powerful than any modern volcano. It would have plunged the world into a volcanic winter lasting for years, killing off vegetation and animal life. The theory proposes that this event created a severe genetic bottleneck, reducing the entire human population to just a few thousand individuals, perhaps as few as 3,000. Paleoanthropologists still argue whether the Toba supereruption was the primary cause of this genetic bottleneck, or if it was one of many contributing factors during a period of intense climate instability. Whether it was Toba or other pressures, our DNA shows that we are all descendants of a very small, very hardy group of survivors. We almost didn't make it. We are all surprisingly closely related. So be nice to that person who cuts you off in traffic. They might be your 8,000th cousin, twice removed. This story, a tale of evolution, migration out of Africa, and near extinction, is written in our genes. It's a narrative of resilience, of survival against impossible odds. It doesn't require alien gods or secret gold mining operations. The truth, etched into the very core of our being, is that we are the children of survivors. We are the result of a million chance encounters and a desperate struggle for existence on a planet that has often tried to wipe us out. And in many ways, that's a far more empowering origin story than being someone else's science fair project. We've deconstructed the planet, the motive, and the genetics. But what about all those other weird artifacts? The rockets, the wristwatches, the light bulbs? As we saw, each one has a conventional explanation rooted in mythology and symbolism. But there's one piece of Anunnaki evidence that seems to pop up everywhere, a persistent and perplexing image, the divine handbag. You've seen it. In the Assyrian relief, the winged Apkallu genie holds it. But then you look further afield. You see a stone carving from an ancient Göbekli Tepe pillar in Turkey, dating back to 9000 BC, long before the Sumerians. It shows the same object, a small, purse-like shape with a handle. Then you jump across the world to Mesoamerica. A relief from the Olmec civilization in ancient Mexico shows a figure, often interpreted as the god Quetzalcoatl, holding the exact same handbag. You see it again in artwork from the Maori people of New Zealand. From Mesopotamia to Mexico, this strange little accessory keeps appearing. across cultures and millennia that had absolutely no contact with each other. To the ancient astronaut theorist, this is irrefutable proof of a global, advanced civilization. The Anunnaki, this handbag, they argue, must be some kind of important device. Perhaps it's a power pack, a toolkit for genetic engineering, or maybe the seed of life they used to restart civilization after the flood. The bag is the smoking gun, the common denominator linking all these disparate ancient cultures back to a single, technologically advanced source. It's a compelling visual argument. Why would all these people, separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, all independently decide to carve statues of their gods holding what looks for all the world like a designer clutch? It seems like a pretty big coincidence. So let's solve this mystery once and for all. What is the divine handbag? The answer is surprisingly simple, deeply rooted in ancient symbolism, and has nothing to do with alien technology. The handbag is, in all likelihood, a representation of a basket. Okay, that sounds a little anticlimactic. Basket? How is a basket a profound religious symbol? Well, in the earliest days of civilization, before permanent stone or metal containers were common, baskets were everything. A mainstream historical fact is that basket weaving is one of the oldest human crafts, far older than pottery or metallurgy. A well-made basket, woven from reeds and often sealed with bitumen to make it waterproof, was a vessel of life. It was used to carry water, to gather seeds and food from the wild, and to sow those seeds in the first agricultural fields. The basket was the tool that enabled the transition from a nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle to a settled agricultural one. It was, in a very real sense, the container that held the foundations of civilization itself. So when an ancient artist wanted to depict a god or a mythical hero bringing the gift of civilization to humanity, what better symbol to use? The handbag or basket is a concise, powerful piece of iconography. Seeing a god hold it is shorthand for this is the being who brought us agriculture, abundance, and the settled way of life. A quirky tidbit is to think of it like a modern icon on your computer screen. You don't need to write out a folder containing multiple documents. You just see a little picture of a manila folder, and you instantly understand what it represents. The ancient handbag was the same thing, an icon for civilization, divinity, and cosmic order. So why does it appear in both Mesopotamia and Mesoamerica? This is where we get into the idea of archetypes, universal symbols that can arise independently in different cultures because they tap into a common human experience. Both the Sumerians and the Olmecs were foundational civilizations for their respective regions. Both underwent the transition to agriculture. Both built monumental architecture and developed complex cosmologies. It's not that one learned the symbol from the other. It's that both cultures, when faced with the need to represent the concept of foundations of civilization, independently arrived at a similar visual solution, the basket used to build that very civilization. It's a case of convergent symbolic evolution. Anthropologists still argue about the precise mechanisms of how such specific archetypes can appear in disconnected cultures, a debate famously central to the work of Carl Jung and his concept of the collective unconscious. Whether you believe it's a hardwired part of the human psyche or simply a logical outcome of similar societal developments, the handbag is a perfect example. It's a symbol of cosmic royalty and order. Just as a modern monarch holds a scepter and orb to represent their power, the ancient gods held a basket and a cone, the purifier, used to sprinkle the sacred water from the basket, to represent theirs. It's a joke, really, that we've spent so much time trying to turn a divine symbol of a basket into a piece of alien luggage. It's like future archaeologists finding a picture of the Queen of England and arguing for centuries about whether her orb is a hand grenade or a thermal detonator. The mystery of the divine handbag, in the end, isn't a mystery at all. It's a lesson in learning to think like an ancient person, not a modern one. It reminds us that the most powerful objects in a culture aren't always technological, they are symbolic. And the most universal ideas don't always need a global spaceship-faring race to spread them. Sometimes they just need a basket. So the handbag is a basket. The rocket ships, are mythological symbols. The genetic labs are misunderstood creation myths. The 12th planet is a ghost in the machine of orbital physics. One by one, we've watched the central pillars of the Anunnaki theory crumble under the weight of evidence from a dozen different scientific fields. The case seems to be closed. And yet, admit it, a small part of you is probably a little disappointed. The version of history with aliens, gold rushes, and rebellious gods is just so much more exciting. And that is the final piece of the puzzle. It's perhaps the most important piece of all. We've spent all this time asking if the Anunnaki theory is true. Now I have to ask a different question. Why do we so desperately want it to be? The enduring power of this story has very little to do with cuneiform or astronomy, and everything to do with psychology. It's a story custom-made for the modern human brain. You live in a world that has been, for the most part, explained. We know why the sun rises. We know what causes disease. We can predict the weather with reasonable accuracy. The great, terrifying mysteries that haunted our ancestors have been tamed by science, cataloged, and filed away. Our world can sometimes feel disenchanted. We've traded gods and monsters for quarks and quarterly earnings reports. And while that has given us incredible technology and longer lives, it has also left a void, a craving for magic, for a sense of wonder, for the feeling that there is something more to the story than what we see. The Anunnaki theory rushes in to fill that void. It re-enchants the world. It turns a dusty museum exhibit into a treasure hunt for alien technology. It transforms a boring geology lesson into a clue about a secret mining operation. It gives history a plot twist. It tells you that the world is not what it seems, that there is a secret, epic story hidden just beneath the surface, and that you are now one of the few who knows it. It's an incredibly seductive idea. A mainstream historical fact that perfectly illustrates this human tendency is the phenomenon of cargo cults. During and after World War II, many isolated tribal societies in the Pacific Islands, like those on Vanuatu, encountered advanced technology for the first time. They saw massive airplanes, great birds, land on runways cleared from the jungle, bringing incredible wealth or cargo, canned food, steel tools, medicine. The soldiers who brought these things would perform strange rituals, marching in formation, raising flags. When the war ended and the soldiers left, the cargo stopped coming. In their attempt to get the cargo to return, some islanders began to mimic the soldiers' rituals. They built life-sized replicas of airplanes out of straw and wood. They carved wooden rifles and marched in parades. They built control towers with bamboo antennas, hoping to guide the great cargo birds back down from the sky. They didn't see technology. They saw magic and ritual, and they created a new religion around it. They did exactly what ancient astronaut theorists accuse our ancestors of doing, interpreting advanced technology through a mythological lens. A quirky, and much older, parallel is the ancient philosophy of Gnosticism. The Gnostics believed that the material world was not created by a benevolent god, but by a lesser, flawed, and often malevolent entity called the demiurge, kind of like the universe's worst middle manager. They believed that salvation came from attaining gnosis, or secret knowledge, which would allow one to escape the prison of the material world. Sitchin's narrative is a perfect modern Gnostic myth. Enlil, the angry, controlling god who wants to keep humanity ignorant, is the demiurge. Enki, the rebel scientist who offers humanity the knowledge of procreation and saves them from the flood, is a heroic, Gnostic savior figure. The theory tells you that mainstream history and religion are a lie, a system created by the demiurge Enlil, but that you, through the secret knowledge, Sitchin's books, can see the truth. This also taps into a powerful modern sentiment, a deep and growing mistrust of authority and experts. The theory whispers that the stuffy professors in their ivory towers are either too blind to see the truth or are part of a massive conspiracy to hide it. It empowers you, the listener, the reader, by saying that you can use your own common sense to see what the expert cannot. It's a very flattering message. Sociologists and psychologists still argue, Whether the rise of modern conspiracy theories is primarily driven by a lack of education, a deep-seated mistrust of institutions, or a fundamental human need for narratives that provide a sense of control in a chaotic world. Ultimately, we are storytelling apes. We make sense of the universe by telling stories about it. And Zacarias Sitchin, whatever his flaws as a linguist and a historian, was a phenomenal storyteller. He took 1,000 disparate puzzle pieces, myths, artifacts, and linguistic oddities, and assembled them into one grand, unified theory of everything. It's a story with heroes and villains, family drama, high-stakes action, and a secret origin for humanity. It's an epic. And for many, that epic is more satisfying than the messy, complicated, and often random story told by mainstream science. It's not that people who believe in it are foolish. It's that they are human, and they are looking for a story big enough to make sense of it all. And the Anunnaki narrative, for better or worse, has become one of the most powerful myths of our time. The story has escaped the pages of Sitchin's books. It has broken free from the niche corners of internet forums and late-night radio shows. Like one of its own genetically engineered creations, the Anunnaki narrative has taken on a life of its own, replicated, and spread until it has become a recognizable feature in the landscape of modern popular culture. You no longer need to read The 12th Planet to be familiar with its core concepts. You just have to watch a movie, play a video game, or listen to certain kinds of music. You're settling into a plush seat in a dark movie theater. On the screen, a team of archaeologists uncovers a star map in an ancient cave, a clue left by giant, pale-skinned alien engineers who, it turns out, created human life on Earth. This is the plot of Ridley Scott's 2012 film Prometheus. While the word Anunnaki is never spoken, the thematic DNA is identical to Sitchin's theory. A primordial humanoid alien race visits Earth, engineers humanity, and leaves behind clues to our origins. The film taps directly into that wellspring of "we were created by aliens" lore that Sitchin did so much to popularize. You switch from the cinema to your gaming console. You're playing one of the games in the wildly popular Assassin's Creed series. As you explore ancient Greece, Egypt, or Norway, you uncover the series' deep lore, a long-extinct, hyper-advanced precursor race called the ISU, or those who came before, created humanity to be a docile workforce. A mainstream historical fact is that the Assassin's Creed franchise is famous for its meticulous and beautiful reconstructions of historical settings, from Renaissance Florence to Ptolemaic Egypt. But woven into this real history is a fictional backstory that is pure Sitchin. The ASU are the Anunnaki in all but name. They genetically engineered us. There was a war between them and their human creations. They were wiped out by a massive solar flare, a cataclysm similar to Sitchin's Great Flood. The pieces of Eden that drive the game's plot are their powerful, leftover technological artifacts. It's a perfect example of how the ancient astronaut framework can be used to build a compelling fictional universe. The influence is everywhere once you start looking for it. The Marvel Cinematic Universe features the Eternals, a race of immortal, superpowered aliens sent to Earth by giant cosmic celestials to protect humanity from their monstrous counterparts, the Deviants. It's a comic book version of the Enki versus Enlil dynamic, with godlike beings secretly guiding human destiny. The film Stargate, and the subsequent TV series, is built entirely on the premise that the ancient Egyptian gods, like Ra, were actually parasitic aliens who use human beings as hosts and slaves, bringing their advanced technology with them. The triangular Stargate itself is their mode of transport, just as Sitchin proposed the Anunnaki had their own gate of the gods. That a quirky tidbit is how the Anunnaki theory has seeped into the world of hip-hop and R&B. Several artists have referenced the Anunnaki in their lyrics, often using them as a metaphor for hidden power structures, secret knowledge, or a sense of being descended from something ancient and powerful. It becomes a symbol for an alternative, suppressed history, which resonates deeply with themes of rebellion and esoteric knowledge present in some corners of the genre. Even when the name Anunnaki isn't used, the core components of the theory have become common tropes in science fiction: the precursor race, the idea of a lost, hyper-advanced civilization that predates humanity and left behind its technology, is now a staple of sci-fi, from Halo's forerunners to Mass Effect Protheans. Humanity's engineered origins, the concept that we are not the product of natural evolution but were created or uplifted by an alien species, is a recurring theme. Myth as history, the reinterpretation of ancient myths, legends, and religious texts as misunderstood encounters with alien technology, is the foundational premise of countless books, shows, and movies. Media historians still argue about the precise chicken and egg relationship between pulp sci-fi and ancient astronaut theories. Did early sci-fi writers in the 40s and 50s plant the seeds for these ideas, or did writers like von Daniken and Sitchin simply popularize concepts that were already floating in the cultural ether? The truth is likely a feedback loop, with each one influencing and amplifying the other. Sitchin provided a seemingly scholarly backbone for wild sci-fi ideas, and sci-fi provided a visually exciting language to imagine Sitchin's theories. The result is that the Anunnaki myth has become a kind of modern folklore. It's a shared story that is constantly being retold and remixed. It has achieved a level of cultural penetration that most historical facts can only dream of. People who have never heard of the historical King Sargon of Akkad might be intimately familiar with the idea of Nibiru. And that might be the ultimate ironic legacy of Zacharias Sitchin. He failed to convince the historians, but he accidentally wrote one of the most successful science fiction universes of the 20th century. He didn't rewrite our past, but he definitely helped to shape the imagination of our present. We've traveled to a phantom planet, debated the meaning of ancient words, and sifted through the pop culture legacy of a grand cosmic theory. And now our journey brings us back to where we started. You're standing once more on that sun-scorched plain between the Tigris and the Euphrates. The air still smells of clay and reeds. The ziggurat still claws its way toward the sky. After all this talk of aliens and spaceships, it's easy to lose sight of the people who actually lived here. It's time to give the Sumerians their credit back. Because the truth is, you don't need to invoke aliens to be utterly floored by what they accomplished. Their real story is, in many ways, more impressive than the fiction. Let's take another walk through their city, but this time, let's see it not as a proxy settlement for alien miners, but as a monument to human genius. Look at the ziggurat again. It's not a launch pad. It's a testament to social organization. To build something this massive required a level of planning, resource management, and labor coordination that was unprecedented in human history. A mainstream historical fact is that the Great Ziggurat of Ur, built around 2100 BC, had a base of 64 by 45 meters and was constructed from millions of baked bricks, each one painstakingly made by hand. It required a centralized government that could command a huge workforce, architects who understood complex geometry, and a social structure where people believed in a common purpose enough to undertake such a multi-generational project. That is a miracle of sociology, not alien intervention. Wander into the markets. You see a merchant and a farmer finalizing a deal for a cartload of barley. The farmer can't write, but he has a small cylinder seal on a string around his neck. He rolls it across a damp clay tablet, leaving his unique signature to make the contract binding. This is the foundation of law and commerce. The Sumerians gave us the world's first legal codes. The Code of Ur-Nammu, written centuries before the more famous Code of Hammurabi, laid out laws for everything from divorce to assault. It established the principle of an eye for an eye, but often substituted it with a system of monetary fines, a remarkably sophisticated legal concept. It established that society should be governed by written, predictable rules, not the arbitrary whims of the powerful. A pretty good idea for a bunch of folks who supposedly needed aliens to tell them what to do. You look up at the sky as night falls. The stars are brilliant here, away from the light pollution of the modern world. Sumerian priests, the first real astronomers, are already on top of the ziggurat, tracking the movements of the planets and constellations. They didn't have telescopes, but with meticulous, naked-eye observation over centuries, they created the zodiac. They divided the year into 12 months based on the lunar cycle. They divided the day into 24 hours, the hour into 60 minutes, and the minute into 60 seconds. The base 60 sexagesimal system they invented for their mathematics is the reason a circle has 360 degrees. The very way you measure time today is a direct inheritance from the Sumerians. A quirky but profound tidbit is their contribution to literature. We've talked about their myths as source material for Sitchin, but let's appreciate them as what they are, the world's first literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh, first written down in Sumerian, is not a garbled memory of a demigod king. It is a deeply human and timeless story about friendship, the fear of death, and the search for meaning in a finite life. Gilgamesh's grief over the death of his friend Enkidu and his desperate, failed quest for immortality is one of the most powerful and relatable stories ever told. It asks the same questions we ask ourselves today. What makes a good life? How do we face our own mortality? The Sumerians weren't just taking dictation from gods. They were wrestling with the human condition and turning it into art. Historians and archaeologists still argue about the precise reasons for the decline of Sumerian civilization around 2000 BC, attributing it to a combination of factors including intense intercity warfare, soil salinization from centuries of irrigation, and a catastrophic, prolonged drought. Their demise wasn't a sudden departure of their alien masters. It was a slow, complex environmental and political collapse, a cautionary tale that still resonates today. The Anunnaki theory, in a strange way, does a great disservice to the real Sumerians. It takes their greatest accomplishments, their art, their science, their laws, their literature, and attributes them to someone else. It looks at the first evidence of human genius on a mass scale and says, no, humans couldn't have done this on their own. It steals their agency and their brilliance. The truth is, the Sumerians didn't need aliens to be amazing. They were brilliant innovators, tireless workers, and profound thinkers who laid the foundation for virtually every civilization that followed. They looked at a harsh, unpredictable world and, through sheer grit and ingenuity, they invented the city, they invented writing, they invented law, and they invented the very concept of history. They don't need to be the servants of alien gods to be worthy of our awe. They just need to be who they were, our ancestors. Our long journey is coming to an end. We've walked the dusty streets of ancient Uruk, floated in the blackness of space, and delved into the double helix of our own DNA. We have followed the wild, sprawling, and seductive story of the Anunnaki, a tale that weaves together myth, pseudoscience, and a genuine human longing for answers. We have seen how a few misinterpreted words on a clay tablet could blossom into a grand unified theory of everything, complete with a secret planet and a dramatic origin for our species. And we have seen how, when tested against the evidence, this grand theory begins to dissolve. The language doesn't hold up. The astronomy doesn't work. The genetics tells a different, more complex story. The artifacts have simpler, more human explanations. The great, towering narrative of Zacharias Sitchin, it seems, is a modern myth, not an ancient history. It's a testament to the power of storytelling, but not a testament to the truth. So, are you disappointed? It's okay if you are. It's natural to feel a little let down when a magical story is replaced by a more complicated, less sensational reality. The idea that we are special, that we were chosen and created by powerful beings from the stars, is a deeply comforting one. It gives us a central role in a cosmic drama. The alternative, that we are the product of a long, slow, and often random process of evolution on a single, ordinary planet in a quiet corner of the galaxy, can feel less glamorous. It can make us feel small. But maybe it shouldn't. Maybe the real magic is not that gods came from the sky to create us, but that we, a species of clever apes, evolved the capacity to look up at that same sky and wonder where we came from in the first place. A mainstream historical fact is that every single culture in human history has developed a creation myth. From the Babylonian Enuma Elish to the Norse tale of the giant Ymir, from the Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime to the scientific story of the Big Bang, we are a species that needs to know its beginning. We are hardwired to search for an origin story. The Anunnaki theory is simply our newest creation myth. It's a product of the 20th and 21st centuries, a myth for the space age. It replaces the gods of wind and water with gods of hyperspace and genetics. It replaces divine magic with futuristic technology. It's a story perfectly tailored for an era that mistrusts authority, craves wonder, and is more comfortable with the idea of aliens than with the idea of gods. A quirky final tidbit. In a way, believing that humanity's greatest achievements, like the pyramids, were built by aliens is one of the most accidentally human-centric ideas out there. It assumes that if we can't figure out how to do something with our current technology, then no human society ever could have, a kind of chronological arrogance. Philosophers and theologians still argue whether the human search for a creation story stems from a deep-seated psychological need for meaning and purpose, or if it is an evolutionary spandrel, a byproduct of our advanced cognitive abilities for pattern recognition and causal thinking. Are we looking for the story because we need it to feel whole, or are we just so good at finding patterns that we can't help but impose a narrative onto the chaos of existence? Perhaps the answer doesn't matter as much as the search itself. The real journey isn't about finding a definitive answer that satisfies everyone. It's about the process of asking the questions. It's about sifting through the evidence, weighing the claims, and learning to distinguish between what is real and what we simply want to be real. It's about learning to appreciate the genuine wonders of human history without needing to add a supernatural or extraterrestrial layer to make them feel significant. The story of the Anunnaki may not be true, but the questions it raises, who are we? Where did we come from? Are we alone? Are the most important questions we can ask. They are the questions that drive science, inspire art, and define our humanity. So, as you get ready to drift off, maybe the takeaway from tonight's journey isn't a conspiracy, but a connection. A connection to those ancient Sumerians who looked up at the same stars you can see and felt the same sense of awe and wonder. They told their stories to make sense of the world, and we, thousands of years later, are still doing the exact same thing. As the lines between myth and history begin to soften and blur in the quiet moments before sleep, you can let the details of Sitchin's tale gently fade. The gold mines can power down, the spaceships can return to their phantom planet, and the great cosmic debates between alien brothers can finally fall silent. What remains is not the echo of their voices, but the quiet, persistent, and deeply human whisper of our own search for a place in the cosmos. A search that began in a cradle between two rivers and continues tonight, in the soft darkness of your own room. The need for a grand narrative is woven into our very being, a timeless impulse that connects us to every ancestor who ever looked up at the night sky and asked why. And in that shared, unending question, you can find a sense of belonging far more profound than any story of a distant creator could ever offer. Let that feeling of connection be your final thought as you drift away, becoming part of the long, unbroken story of human wonder. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye and see you again in the next stories.